Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you back to the Dynamic Decisions podcast, where we explore the strategies that drive successful decision making in the world of business. Why? Because the best decisions come from great conversations. I'm your host, Tisha Cable, CEO of C Model Data. But today, we have a leading voice in rural planning and small town economic resilience. His name is John. He's a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners, AICP, and Vice Chair of Communications for the American Planning Association's Small Town and Rural Planning Division. He's got over 30 years of experience working in planning and economic development across the Midwest and the Mountain States. John, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to talk to you. Would you please just kind of give us more of an introduction and background into you and who you are and the work that you're doing every day?
Thank you, Tisha. I really appreciate this. The podcast that you do is so interesting. You cover such a broad variety of topics and bring something new to the community. My name is John Shepard. I'm a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. It just means I took a test a long time ago, and I keep going back for my certification maintenance. I like to learn new things. It's what I do. I've worked in a broad arc from Illinois across the northern plains down through the Rocky Mountain states into New Mexico. I've mostly worked with small towns and rural communities. It's where I grew up. I've also worked with some larger communities. Well, if you call Cheyenne, Wyoming, or Grand Island, Nebraska larger in my part of the world, those are big cities. But a lot of times you find the small towns work like neighborhoods in a bigger city. We're all united in our differences that way. But as a community planner and economic developer, a lot of what I'm doing is looking at the broad ways that all of this works together. I've worked in the public sector, I've worked in the private sector, and it's really the places that are most resilient are the places that are open to different ways of doing what we've done before. The only thing that stays the same is change.
This is good and super important. So thank you so much. Okay, let's jump right in. I want to talk about something that you do that most people don't even realize is necessary. You take municipal codes from the 1970s and then you rewrite them for today's realities. Solar farms, fiber optic networks, Airbnb, for example. So here's what I want to understand. Can you give me a specific code rewrite where the gap between what the old regulations assumed and what the community actually needed was so stark that it was almost comical? Because I imagine that you open up these old ordinances and they're literally not contemplating technologies or business models that might actually define a rural community today. So tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, two examples come right to mind. One is when we look at downtown regulations. Euclidean zoning from the 1920s, 100th anniversary now. You know how that is. And most people ask for forgiveness rather than permission. But that's not how zoning works if it's not specifically listed as prohibited. And that can be tough. But you look at a lot of our small towns, they started out very simply, and their codes just can't handle the things we're doing today. That there's a movement for makerspace and being able
Mm.
to reactivate historic buildings downtown. The codes are typically written, well, we only want retail downtown because we need that retail sales tax. It's just the way how we do things. But life gets complicated.
Hmm.
We have a lot of non-conforming right here in the community I live in. We've got a small manufacturing repair business. It's downtown. It's been there before zoning. It will probably be there long after I'm gone. But it can't easily rehab the buildings because it doesn't fit the code. So one
Mm.
of the things that we really need to do better is giving people more options in the downtown space, because industry today is not your granddad's industry. You can't see it, hear it, or smell it. Make it permitted use. Don't make people go through those extra hoops. It's bad for business and it's bad for community. We need to activate those buildings. And, in a downtown, it's all about location. And the
Mhm.
worst thing for any business is to be next to an empty building. Second example comes from my time working in the mountain states more, but it comes up in the Great Plains across the country. Short-term rentals. Classic zoning is a lodging use. A short-term rental is a lodging use by definition. You
Mm-hmm.
collect lodging tax, it's a lodging use only allowed commercial zoning districts. Where short-term rentals? They're in residential districts. I worked up in Archuleta County, Colorado, Pagosa Springs. Beautiful Four Corners region between Wolf Creek Pass and Durango.
Mm-hmm.
When I walked in the door, we were just starting with the short-term rentals, and they were on the face illegal. The county board would not enforce the regulations because it was politically untenable. The county
Mm-hmm.
attorney didn't have time to do it. So what we did was, okay, let's craft a regulation that we can enforce. Colorado at that time gave the communities a lot of local control, but it was a combination that made it doable because large platforms like Airbnb and VRBO made some necessary reforms to collect the lodging tax. Funny thing, once you collect lodging taxes, the local governments just they're okay with it.
There we go.
The problem is the people living next door, it's 1 in 10, 1 in 100 that's a problem.
Mhm.
But when that's your house, your retirement home, and next door on Saturday night is a party house,
That's right.
that's a
Yeah.
problem. So we need to look at how do our codes be both more user-friendly and realistic while still balancing property rights.
Yeah. So you say it that way. You're modernizing these frameworks. How do you actually balance between enabling economic opportunity against the very real fear that updating the codes might accelerate more change and that change might erode what people actually move there to preserve?
Exactly, exactly, and that's why these situations are so difficult. It also is one of the reasons why local planners have such a short career, in a lot of these places. If you are realistic and speak truth to the decision makers, you're not always gonna like what you see. You see
Mhm.
that in economic development, you see that in planning, code enforcement, good luck. It's difficult, but we have to balance our professional ethics and our duty to all of the residents in the community. That, from my point of view, I've always been strong advocate of private property rights. That's what America was built on. That's what Western economies are built on, property rights.
Mhm.
But you have to balance those property rights. Your right to run a party house ends at my bedroom window.
Mhm.
And it's difficult. There are very few places that are doing this well,
Mhm.
but they're trying. They're
Mhm.
they're trying. Now, some states, like here in Nebraska, the state legislature decided to preempt local authority. There's very little local community here can do to regulate short-term rentals. Nebraska is not Colorado, is not California, but every state is doing this differently, and there's advantages and disadvantages to any of those approaches.
Mhm.
I am a strong proponent of local communities building on their own. And that
Mhm.
also means you got to do the hard work. And if your
Mhm.
community folks can't have a civil conversation, which is difficult these days.
That's really difficult. And which leads to some of what I want to talk about next. So your city of Burwell plan won the Vernon Danes Award, which is this national recognition
It was for our
for
Nebraska. It was actually for our Nebraska chapter's version of that.
oh, okay, your Nebraska chapter. What it is okay, thank you for correcting me. That it's the award for a town under 1,200 people, and it's exceptional, right? We think these are good things. So, what I'm really curious about is when you're planning for a community that small with volunteer planning commissions and maybe one part-time administrator, what made the plan implementable versus just a beautiful document that ends up sitting on a shelf? Because what I imagine is that you've seen plenty of gorgeous, comprehensive plans that don't happen because the capacity to execute them isn't there. So tell me a little bit more about.
Oh, excellent insight, Tisha. I don't know how many projects I've worked on as part of a team where we see the vision and it's beautiful plan and people look at it and put it on a shelf and never pick it up again. And if it's thick enough, it might work as a doorstop. our approach in Burwell was multiple companies were involved. My employer, MSA, a consulting firm out of Iowa, was helping us with community engagement, strategic planning. We had another professional out of Oklahoma working with us on a capital improvements plan. But from day one, our perspective was implementation. We also had very strong local leadership from our local economic development. Jessica Vanderwall, she could be working anywhere. She lives in rural Nebraska at the edge of the Sandhills because that's where her family is. She
Mm-hmm.
is an entrepreneur. Her family has a food business there. They have interests. They have kids in the schools. They are ingrained in the community.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not all about her. Jessica was very, very good about building a team in our community. And she brought in her economic development folks. She brought in the Chamber of Commerce folks. She brought in the folks from the rodeo, Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association, Nebraska's big rodeo. They have a reservoir and they're attracting people into the community. And the Planning Commission has been trying to work with this, and they had this old outdated code and it just didn't work. And they were like, we just want it to work. So we pulled this together. Our community engagement was key to this. And that's where the local community foundation came in. Nebraska Community Foundation is a treasure in this state, and
Mm-hmm.
they help facilitate and train and bring together conversations on local community foundations. So they're not just a couple of folks that are give out scholarships. There's so much more of that. So Burwell is just a perfect storm, but it all centered around Jessica Vanderwood. From day one, she just wanted it to work. She was already in the middle of doing workforce housing. She knew she needed a a comprehensive plan that would support that
Mm-hmm.
effort. That they had a local health agency that desperately needed a new building. They needed daycare. Oh, that's an issue throughout rural America is daycare. And she knew if they were going to be successful, they needed the plans, but they needed to be strategic and focused on implementation. And that's where, as planners, we need to do a better job at making our plans implementable. Focus on getting things done. That Becky McCrae with Save Your Town, she
Mm-hmm.
focuses on her idea friendly method. And I've
Mm-hmm.
really tried to take that to heart
Mm-hmm.
that, that we love our plans. What are you going to do about it?
What are we going to do? Right. And do the plans absolutely align to the outcomes is the most critical piece because the outcomes are the most important thing. So not only can I implement it, but it's actually going to move the needle on the key things that I needed to move the needle on.
Exactly, and that's where part of that one of the things I've been trying to work more on is the, review and, measurement of implementation. That's so hard in a small community because the usual KPIs, the usual metrics, they're not even measured below the county level. That if you're outside of a census urban area, you don't even have these statistics. And
Mhm.
I don't know what the answers are for those small areas, but there's a lot of really smart people around the country that are trying to do better at those metrics, especially when there's so much budget and other pressure on the Census
Mhm.
Bureau and BA and BLS.
Mhm.
Those folks in Washington and in our state data centers do such a good job trying to get us data, but their hands are tied. They can only do what
Mhm.
they can do. The Burwell project was also recognized by our APA Small Town and Rural Planning Division. And what I was told was it was based on our focus on implementation,
Mhm. That's good.
that we need to find better ways to try something, measure it, and then try something else.
I like it. So you've been guiding these comprehensive plans across multiple counties simultaneously. You had the Jefferson Clay Hall there. That's not just managing complexity. That's actually orchestrating alignment where each county has different politics and different priorities. So the challenge I see, like when County A's permissive approach to something creates competitive pressure on County B, or when one jurisdiction's economic development strategy creates spillover effects, that neighbors have to deal with, what's your framework? When do you push for like regional consensus versus just accepting that some of the tensions might require really clear boundaries.
We see that with projects. We see that in the planning. Frankly, and I think both planners and economic developers, especially in smaller jurisdictions, realize we have to be realistic about the implementation capacity of our communities. Frankly, most of this work we do, we can talk about shift share analysis. Most people is like, yeah, okay, whatever. What does that mean on the ground? It means, hey, you are becoming very competitive in food products, value added. What are you going to do to make that better? One of the things that we see out here is we start talking about zoning and setbacks and things. I want to know where I can build my fence. I don't
Hmm.
want to have to get a permit to build my fence. Do I have to get a permit to build my fence?
Hmm.
That's what people care about. You may only build a house once in your lifetime, but that's going to be the most important thing to you ever.
Hmm.
And planners tend to make things complicated because, well, lawyers. So we continue to try to make those easier. But when you come into economic development, predictability, and we need to be more clear on the expectations in our zoning regulations. It's my experience working on entitlements in the private sector, time value of money, that you have to push for what's works in your community, but make it clear. And that's the problem. We have so many things going to discretionary review, conditional use permits.
Hmm.
And then people get all excited. I love to see a room full of people at a meeting, but at the point where we start to balance, like you said, emotions and politics versus somebody who's just trying to run a business, why, as an entrepreneur, are you going to deal with that? You're going to go where people want you.
Absolutely.
That's tough.
Keeping with this concept of implementation capacity, I want to talk a little bit about your concept of ideas. So you champion the idea friendly method, small incremental actions over lengthy committee processes, for example. And that's a very specific philosophy about how change could happen in a community. But there can also be a tension, right? Traditional comprehensive planning is very formal. Steering committees, months of engagement, thick documents, official adoption. But when you're deciding how to structure a planning process, how do you balance the legitimacy that the formal process actually gives against the risk that they're so slow and bureaucratic that they kill all the momentum before anything gets implemented?
Tisha, you've got the golden ticket right there. Anybody who can figure that out, people are going to be lined up at their door. It's something that you try. It's as planners, as economic developers, we also have to take our own advice. Sometimes we're the worst at following our own process. We've got our business plans. Comp plan is a lot like a business plan for the community. You go to any banker, they're going to see your comp plan. There's no reason that anybody coming to your community shouldn't want to see your comp plan as your business plan. But we also know that you have to constantly test your business plan, that the market changes, it shifts on a dime, and we need to be better at making these living documents. But that's tough. We've got public protections. You have formal public hearings. We don't want backroom deals. We want these things to happen in the public. But the places that we've worked, places like Burwell, end up with a two-tier. You've got your long-term business plan that you're constantly testing and adjusting and listening to people. Storage containers, some places love them, some places hate them. Some people
Mhm.
for business, it's an essential part of their business to be able to have a storage container on site. The neighbors don't want to
Mm.
look at them. We went through a number of iterations through the planning process. How's that going to work in there? They want to look nice for tourists, but they
Mhm.
also are very practical people, and they don't like being told what to do.
Mhm.
So they tweaked it, and they continue to work on that. So that we need to be better at having this both long-term vision with short-term actions. And
Mhm.
then that one of the things that Chris Jansen is a planner with MSA in Iowa. They've worked with trying to do more web-based planning. That we worked with Greenfield, Iowa after their tornado, and they
Mhm.
did their plan on a Esri story map with the idea that it could be more dynamic, that you'd have to wait around for something to be printed out. Anybody with the internet could get on there and it looks good on the computer screen. You could pull it up on your phone, whatever. The idea being it could be more of a living document. As it worked out so well, they're still testing it out. And now
Sure.
they're just going through the zoning and again trying to come up with what works in their community versus what the law allows versus common practice. It's tough. It's
It's tough,
tough.
hard stuff. Hey, this is a quick message for our audience. What planning or development decisions in your community created real progress versus just produced reports? Share your experience with us using Dynamic Decisions Podcast. Go on LinkedIn and type that in for us. We'd love to know a little more. Okay, so you've got a 30-year view across hundreds of rural communities through your APA leadership. What's changed dramatically in rural economic development? I want to understand about what strategies that works, like in the 90s or 2000s, which are completely obsolete now. And are there any emerging opportunities that you're really excited?
I grew up in Fargo, North Dakota, up in the Red River Valley. And after going to college at Illinois and Colorado, I came home to Red River Valley. My first job was as Trail County Economic Development Director. Very rural county between Fargo and Grand Forks. A lot of challenges there. And we tried the typical industrial attraction, and we were respectful. But what we did, we worked with a couple of the state programs there. Ed Schaefer, who was governor at the time, he went on to become Secretary of the Interior. That they had a program called Build North Dakota, but it was focused on uh, knowing your community, pulling your data together. And this was before the internet. This was when we were doing dial-up broadband.
Hmm.
It wasn't even broadband. It was just trying to get your modem to have a signal without paying a long distance phone call. But we
Hmm.
pulled data together so we were prepared. We also did matching grants with the Economic Development District to try to help entrepreneurs take risks. Most of those never went anywhere, but you
Hmm.
don't know unless you try. And that's one of the problems, especially in a rural community where everybody knows everybody else. It's so hard to take risks. And if you fail, where are you going to go?
Hmm.
That's we are so judgmental of failure, but failure is simply a market signal. Okay, that didn't
Hmm.
work. Learn,
Hmm. Learn.
measure what you did, learn, and adjust. And we're just not wired that way.
Hmm.
That we turn, "Oh, you lost money." "Yeah, but I had a very expensive lesson. Let's do something with it." And that's so hard in a small town where if you're gonna do that in a Denver or Chicago, you have the anonymity of the city to pivot.
It's a
But
pivot.
where
Mhm.
this back to your question is, where 30 years ago, all of economic development was all about smokestack chasing. It was
Mhm.
hunting. I was in grad school. I had the opportunity to work for a gentleman named Phil Burgess at Center for the New West. He
Mhm.
coined the term economic gardening.
Mhm. Mhm.
Gibbons took that and applied it to the work he was already doing in Littleton, and boom, boom. Now, Chris is also one of those that's very clear about the difference between economic gardening as a specific system versus the more general entrepreneurship. And a lot of rural communities just don't have the infrastructure capacity to do a true economic gardening. But what that does, the focus is shifted towards entrepreneurship and the fact that most new jobs, like David Birch at MIT said, most new jobs come from new businesses.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also need to be better at the difference between people who are just starting a micro business and people who are doing a startup. Because
That's right. Because one has a sustainable growth, Imma be small, no, probably not more than one or $200,000 a year, and the other has the up and to the right exponential growth, um, potential, t especially if it's a technology-based startup, right? So,
yeah,
yeah, 2
yeah, and
different things.
if
Yeah.
we don't want people to think that they're going to be the next Silicon Prairie
Right.
without that infrastructure. Omaha, Des Moines, Lincoln,
Yeah.
Nebraska, they've been working hard to do that in
Yeah.
those large metro areas. It
Sure.
doesn't mean we can't do it in a small town, especially a small
Sure.
college town, someplace like
100%.
Champaign, Urbana, Illinois. They can do that. Burwell is
Yes.
a place for micro business, and we need to be better at helping people start the things that can work there. You can do remote businesses.
Yes.
There's Marcy Goodwin in Illinois with the micro businesses. That's still very doable. But this trend
Absolutely.
comes back to recognizing not all economic development is about chasing smokestacks.
Hmm.
And in fact, you've seen a tremendous evolution at uh, the International Economic Development Council. I'm a member that
Hmm.
look back from when they were the old AEDC 30 years ago to what they are now. Wow, the world has changed and people are realizing that. And some of it is the guys my age are just working through it.
Hmm.
And the young people coming into the field realize, hey, you need an all of the above approach to improve your community.
Yeah. Okay, John, let's explore your decision-making DNA. Okay. So I've got four different styles and I want to see which one resonates with you. So after each one, you're going to give me a number from 0 to 100%. But you only get 100% total across all four. Okay. So you have to keep that in mind as we're going through. You ready?
Ready.
All right. So the first one is called the feeler. It's the values driven leader. So this is the leader who asks, beyond the economic metrics, what does this do to the fabric of this community and the people who built their lives here? When I'm helping a rural community rewrite zoning codes or approve a controversial development like a solar farm or a wind energy project, I ask myself, beyond the jobs created or tax revenue generated, what does this do to what makes this place feel like home? When I'm modernizing regulations to enable economic opportunity, am I preserving what drew people to rural life in the first place? The pace, the character, the sense that neighbors know each other. If updating codes enables development that brings economic activity but fundamentally changes what makes a small town special, or if a project creates opportunities for some residents while displacing others or destroying landscapes that hold generational meaning, how do I weigh those human and cultural costs against economic benefits, given my focus on idea-friendly method and lowering barriers to local participation? When I'm advocating for planning approaches, am I genuinely empowering residents to shape their community's future rather than just checking engagement boxes while predetermined outcomes move forward?
Tisha, I am inspired. You've just made my week. I tell you, I am one of the things that Chris Gibbons with the has done with economic gardening is the importance of your personality. And I am INTJ, and I'm intuitive, and I've always resisted that emotional aspect of it. And so my initial response would be, 5, 7%. But I have to acknowledge the old, the Daniel Burnham, make no small plans for they fail to inspire the hearts of people. So I'm going to take the coward's way out here and say 25% because it's not what I'm wired to do, but it's what gets communities where they need to be. So I'm going to say 25% and completely out of
Awesome.
my comfort zone.
I like it. Thank you so much. That's a fantastic answer. Here's the next one. It's called the planner. It's a strategic visionary. So this persona thinks about second and third order effects across multiple possible futures. So when I'm drafting comprehensive plans or rewriting zoning regulations for rural communities, I ask myself, what are the compounding effects across multiple scenarios? If rural outmigration and agricultural consolidation continue, am I building frameworks that help communities thrive at smaller populations or trying to reverse trends that might be irreversible? If renewable energy becomes the dominant rural land use, am I creating regulations that let communities capture economic value while protecting agricultural viability and scenic character? If broadband enables remote work to bring new residents to rural areas, does my planning accommodate growth in ways that strengthen community rather than creating tensions between longtime residents and newcomers. If climate change intensifies droughts, floods, and extreme weather, am I building resilience into hazard mitigation plans and land use patterns? Are today's planning decisions creating compounding advantages, infrastructure that enables future opportunities, and regulatory frameworks that adapt as conditions change? Versus solving immediate problems in ways that might constrain options down the road. So, John, how future focused are your decisions?
Well, I am a self-described planner with a master's degree in planning with an economic development concentration. So again, my initial response was, well, I'm all about the plan and the long term and the analysis and the numbers.
Mhm.
But again, that I continually have to realize I love the plan, but the plan is only as good as the implementation and the inspiration. Again, I'll take this at 25% because plan is not me talking to you. It's this is what I have heard you tell me.
That's
This
good.
is not the government telling you what to do. It's you telling the government what they need to do to make this place worth all that stuff we talked about in the feeler.
That's good. Yeah. Okay, here's the next one. It's called the counter. It's the challenger of assumptions. So, this is the person who questions the conventional rural economic development playbook. So, when I look at how most rural economic development works, I ask myself, are we following orthodoxies that aren't actually working for small towns? Communities compete to offer incentives to recruit manufacturing plants, building speculative industrial parks, chasing the same distribution centers as 50 other towns. But I'm championing arts, culture, heritage, preservation, public space investment, the idea friendly method of incremental community driven change. What if the conventional playbook that growth comes from recruiting large employers, that success means competing on incentives and industrial infrastructure, that planning should be formal and committee driven, is exactly why so many rural communities keep losing ground? What if rural America's path forward isn't trying to become something else, but leaning into what makes small towns distinctive, authentic character, quality of life, cultural heritage, community cohesion that metros can't replicate? And given my 30 years of experience and national perspective through APA leadership, what assumptions about how rural communities should develop could I challenge to create more sustainable, community centered outcomes?
Wow. Wow. Eh, that did you know me back in high school when I was on the debate team? I've got a bit of Irish in me and I can argue both sides of the situation. I almost went to law school. It's probably a good thing I didn't. The that this again, you have to balance that as especially you're working in the public sector, you need to challenge, but you also need to respect the people who are the elected leadership. And that's one of those things you only gain through experience. And I've had some of that experience that's knocked me upside the head a few times. I like to say I learned things, but maybe not so much. That this is another one of those things I would have gone higher just because I can argue both sides of pretty much anything. Wind, solar, battery energy storage system, data centers, I can argue both sides. But that's the perspective from the plan side that I'm going to pull this back to 25% because you need to balance it on everything else. But the thing of it is, if you keep doing the same thing you've always done, you're only going to get the same thing you've always got. If you don't grow, you're gonna die, but that doesn't mean the measure of success is how big you are. That you have to find what's best for you, you have to find what's best for your community, but that means not accepting the median. You need to find what makes you unique, what makes your small town unique. Just like if you're running a company, what do you do better than anybody else out there? And if it
Mhm.
just means I make the same plastic burgers that everybody else does, okay, you're never gonna be exceptional.
Mhm.
find what you do better than everybody else and lean into that difference. You do that with this podcast. You're doing something here that nobody else is doing as well as you are, and we all
Oh,
benefit from it. Thank you.
thank you very much. We got one more. Thank you so much for that. It's called the data driver. It's the evidence based decision maker. So, this leader wants solid evidence before making recommendations, demographic data, economic analysis, land use metrics. So, before recommending zoning changes, comprehensive plan frameworks, or development approvals, I ask myself, what evidence do I actually have that this will work? What data tells me which planning interventions produce desired outcomes versus which sound good but don't deliver? Do I understand the relationships between code modernization and subsequent business formation or property investment patterns? When I evaluate controversial projects like renewable energy installations, what metrics help me distinguish between projects that will genuinely benefit the community versus those that extract value while leaving externalities behind? For my award winning comprehensive plans, how do I measure implementation success beyond adoption? Are the recommendations actually getting executed and creating the outcomes communities hoped for? But I also recognize the paradox. How do I measure whether a community's character and identity remain intact as change happens? What qualitative signals from longtime residents, business owners, and newcomers tell me whether planning processes are genuinely building community resilience versus just producing documents? How do I balance making planning recommendations grounded in hard data while recognizing that some of the most important outcomes, whether people feel their voices matter, whether community cohesion strengthens or fractures, whether the next generation can build lives in their hometowns, can't be easily measured, but ultimately determine whether planning is successful? What's your number, John?
Well, I think I've got 25% left.
You do.
I jumped ahead a bit of it. I read ahead a bit of this on my response on the planner side of that because so much of planning is data. So I jumped ahead a bit of that with my response on the planner is data. That I started out in grad school working at the Center for the New West, but we did a study for the U.S. Economic Development Administration on measuring distress in the rural Great Plains. We looked at how the usual numbers of unemployment and per capita income were not good measures of distress in rural America. I part of that process was in Minnesota on another Economic Development Administration study. The numbers that were built for metropolitan America don't work well in non-metro area. So when you're looking at data driven, yes, we have to understand our data, but recognizing that the numbers are just numbers and trying to have quantitative discussions of qualitative information is difficult. People are working on it, though. You have places like Center of Rural Innovation with their data dashboards. They're not saying that these are the end all be all of everything, but they're trying and they're trying to get things to people out in the community that can use them without having to have a PhD in statistics. I
Mhm.
took statistics several times before I passed. I'm not very good at it, but I also, every time I use statistics, I have to be very careful about how I'm using the number.
Yeah, that's
Numbers
right.
lie,
They do.
maps lie,
They
and
can
we
be out of context for sure. Yeah.
honest.
Yeah. Thank
So
you.
do the best you
Awesome.
can with what you've got.
Thank you. John, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. Would you tell our audience where they can learn more about you?
So I write too much on my public policy blog at jcshepard.com, jcshepard.com, and I am on LinkedIn as JC Shepard, John Shepard on there as well. I read too much, I write too much, and I appreciate the opportunity to share this. Also, APA Small Town and Rural Planning Division. If you're an APA member, that you get your first division free next time you re-up. So take a look at us. Also, that IEDC has got some great initiatives coming out for rural America, rural prosperity, and their other initiatives. I feel really positive about the future of rural communities that are willing to put in the hard work. We can do
Wow.
this. We're all in this together.
Thank you so much. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Remember, the best decisions come from great conversations. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd like you to subscribe, rate it, share it with your network. Keep the conversation going on social media using Dynamic Decisions Podcast. And until next time, keep questioning, keep growing, and keep leading with purpose.